My name is Maya, and I did my disability investigation on hearing impairments. So, a hearing impairment is defined by the IDEA as an impairment in hearing, whether permanent or fluctuating, that adversely affects a child's educational performance. It can be considered slight, mild, moderate, severe, or profound, and it can affect someone's ability to hear loudness and/or pitch, and it can also affect each ear differently. And sometimes the hearing impairment may fluctuate, so the severity of it can be different from day to day or throughout the semester. So there's lots of different ways that hearing can be affected, and those effects can be caused by genetic factors, infections, developmental factors, or traumatic factors. And so because there are so many different ways that hearing impairments can come about, there are lots of different ways that they can present themselves. So it's important to understand and work with your student on how they can hear and what you can do to help them. So some of the abilities of an individual with a hearing impairment is that they, unless paired with another disability, they have unimpaired cognitive ability, may excel with visual learning, may be good at focusing. They're not getting any like auditory distractions possibly, so that can help them with focusing. And they may use sign language to communicate in school or at home, so that's important to learn with your student. You can think that if they received a hearing impairment from a genetic factor, that some other people in their family, parents or siblings, may also have hearing impairments, and that is a way that they use sign language at home to communicate. There are a few learning challenges that come with a hearing impairment, and those sometimes English literacy is affected by a hearing impairment, especially in students whose hearing impairment came about at a very early age or a young age, as when they were developing their English literary skills, they also weren't able to hear as much. So they may prefer visual learning strategies, which is a challenge when you need to work with all of your students and use different strategies in your classroom. They may prefer to work alone, which could be a challenge when you want. I'm going to work in a science classroom, and there's a lot of group work and labs that can promote challenges when a student prefers to work alone. There's also a challenge with content knowledge may be taking longer to learn because there are different strategies that student is using, and sometimes those take more time, including listening and transcribing audio lectures, reading printed lectures, and reading closed captioning on video. That can all take longer, that student needs to go home and review all of their work from all of their classes, so that could be a challenge in your classroom. And sometimes instructions and content may just be missed during a class lecture because there are always things that a teacher says that is important that the student may not hear, they may miss, they may not be looking directly at the teacher, and that can create a challenge. A few behavioral challenges that a student with a hearing impairment may have is that there is a difficulty in communication with the teacher or with their peers that may become frustrating. And so you have to think that this student is working a lot harder sometimes than an average student, so you need to take that into account and not become frustrated with that student, and help that student shall they become frustrated while trying to keep up. There's also maybe a challenge with getting the student's attention. You may have to come up with some other ways to get student attention rather than an auditory cue, or maintaining the student attention. It may be easier for that student to not be paying attention as they are missing some auditory clues to bring them back into the conversation and to bring their focus back. So some strategies you can use in your classroom is to encourage the student to sit near the front of the classroom. This is important for students who need a higher volume to be able to hear more. They also are relying on visual cues, so they have to have a clear view of the board, which sitting at the front will provide them. And if they use an interpreter in the classroom, or if they're reading a teacher's lips, then they'll need to be in the front of the classroom to have an unobstructed view with that interaction. It also says encourage, because I wouldn't want to force the student to sit near the front of the classroom and have them shut down if it is something they don't want to do. So I'd encourage all of these things, but not force them unless it was like written in the IEP. So as a teacher, it's important to face the class and the student when speaking to make sure, and that facing the class helps you project your voice louder to the class and also helps for lip reading. And make sure the class is well lit will help the student be able to see the board and your facial expressions or your lips should they need that. A few technologies you can use in your classrooms are microphones or recording devices. That a microphone will help amplify your voice. A recording device will let that student have your voice to review it shall they need to. And there's also some technology that a teacher could speak into a microphone and it will transmit your voice right into the hearing aid of a student if they're using one. It actually acts as a receiver for the microphone, which is pretty cool. Having all the information on handouts that you can provide that student is important so that they know that they're not missing any of the verbal information. It's also important to use captions on videos or simulations so that the student can read. Or another technique is to have the student watch the video on their own time on a laptop and be able to pause it to read closed captioning, or using earbuds, which they can amplify the volume if that helps them. And just check in with the student often, finding out what is being used successfully and what is not, and making modifications to the classroom structure to help that student be successful. Some things you can do to help behavior management. Some strategies are encouraging the student to work with a partner or a group for classwork, but as a teacher being ready to have an alternative assignment if that student does not want to do it. I would say that I would rather the student be working on a personal assignment than shutting down in a group assignment. So I would have modifications ready for that student if they cannot participate or do not want to try to participate. But some ways you can help a student be successful in a group activity is to have a separate setting for the group so that it helps eliminate some extra noise that is happening in the classroom. They may need some more extra time to be successful. You can also make accommodations to due dates if that student needs to go home and they are doing more work reviewing audio lectures and transcribing them, and other techniques that they are using that maybe the rest of the students in the class are not. They may need more time to complete the same assignments. So work with the student individually to give them accommodations. For this demonstration, I'd like y'all to look at this picture and maybe think of a few things that the teacher could be doing differently. You can imagine that this is from the student's perspective of a student with a hearing impairment, and think about what could be different. So some of the things I came up with were that the teacher would probably need to face the students. That will help. He has his back to the students, which I know sometimes will happen, but it would maybe if you had the information typed up already and you just click a button and then face the class while presenting it, that is a really good strategy to be facing the class for the majority of the time. You want to make sure, again, that the classroom is well lit. This is really hard to see what is written on the board. There's shadows and stuff. So I think that if the class is well lit, they'll be able to see, all students will be able to see what's happening on the board. This student is sitting quite far in the back, so you can see that some of the kids' heads are actually covering the board, which could be a problem if they can't hear what's happening and they need to be looking at the board. So having a student with a hearing impairment seated towards the front of the classroom is more effective. Another thing that you can't tell exactly from this picture is to pass out a class script, so that having the teacher ahead of time prepare exactly what is going to be said and having all the content out is helpful, and putting instructions on the board. So if you're about to let the kids do their own thing, you want to have all the instructions on the board. That's a tip that most students will benefit from, so I plan on doing that all the time anyway. So I have my quick reference for hearing impairments linked in the Google Drive, and that covers the characteristics and abilities, learning challenges and strategies for those, behavior challenges, and some strategies for those as well, and some resources that I used for this PowerPoint and you can use in further investigation for hearing impairments. Thank you all for listening.